What if a lost civilization, wiped out by a comet, left us a warning that we're about to repeat their fate? Graham Hancock, a journalist turned maverick researcher, has spent 30 years puzzling over one question. Why does our official history say civilization began only 6,000 years ago? He calls us a species with amnesia because we've forgotten something huge, a global cataclysm that nearly wiped us out 12,800 years ago. Mainstream archaeology says civilization started in Sumer, Egypt and the Indus Valley around 5,500 years ago, but Hancock points to a problem. We have anatomically modern humans dating back 315,000 years. If we've had the same brains and bodies for over 300,000 years, why did we wait until 6,000 years ago to build cities? Hancock thinks the answer is simple. We didn't wait. We just forgot. He points to a specific event, the Younger Dryas, a sudden, catastrophic deep freeze that hit the Earth 12,800 years ago and lasted 1,200 years. This wasn't a normal climate shift. The evidence, Hancock argues, points to a comet, a massive one that broke apart and pelted the Earth with a shotgun blast of fragments. He cites the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. A comet, perhaps 100 kilometers wide, entered our solar system, broke up, and its fragments hit the Earth around 12,800 years ago. The heat from the impacts and airbursts would have melted the ice sheets, causing a sudden pulse of sea level rise even as the planet plunged back into an ice age. This event wiped out the megafauna, woolly mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, and Hancock believes a sophisticated human civilization that existed before the freeze. If this lost civilization existed, where did it live? Not in Northern Europe or North America, which were frozen wastelands. Hancock says it thrived in the tropics, places like Mexico, India, and Indonesia. And he says they left evidence not just in myths, but in ancient maps that show the world as it looked during the Ice Age, including a continent we didn't officially discover until 1820, Antarctica. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis proposes that a massive comet, perhaps 100 kilometers wide, entered our solar system and broke into a deadly swarm of fragments. One known remnant of that ancient comet is Comet NK, a 6-kilometer object that still crosses Earth's orbit twice a year. Around 12,800 years ago, Earth plowed into that debris field. The fragments were not huge, but there were thousands of them, most detonated in the air, each blast equal to a substantial nuclear explosion. The evidence is scattered across continents, from the west coast of North America to Belgium, all the way to Syria. This comet storm triggered a radical climate shift. The Earth had been warming nicely for 1,000 years, but suddenly it plunged back into a deep freeze. This period is called the Younger Dryas, and it lasted 1,200 brutal years. The megafauna of the Ice Age, woolly mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths were wiped out in that window. And here is the strangest part. At the very start of this cold snap, sea levels rose dramatically, the opposite of what should happen when ice sheets are growing. The impact theory explains it. The heat and airburst from the comet fragments melted huge volumes of ice in an instant, sending a pulse of meltwater into the oceans. Then 11,600 years ago, the deep freeze ended as abruptly as it began. The Earth warmed again, and the ice sheets retreated. These were not gradual changes. They were radical, world-shaking events. And they happened right in the middle of human history, only 12,800 years ago, which is yesterday in archaeological terms. So here is the puzzle that drives Graham Hancock. If humans were anatomically modern 315,000 years ago, with the same brains we have today, why did we wait over 300,000 years to build civilization? The standard answer is that civilization emerged only 6,000 years ago after agriculture allowed specialization. But Hancock asks, what if we are missing a chapter? But the Younger Dryas wasn't just a freeze. Something else happened at its start. A sea level rise that shouldn't have been possible during a cold snap. Normally, when the Earth cools, ice builds up on land, not melts. So the sudden pulse of meltwater 12,800 years ago was a mystery, until the comet theory came along. The comet theory explains it perfectly. The heat from the air bursts and impacts melted the ice sheets in a flash, sending a pulse of water into the oceans. Then the freeze set in. For 1,200 years, the world was locked in a deep, desperate cold. And then 11,600 years ago, it suddenly warmed up again. These climate shifts were radical beyond anything happening today. And they happened right when our ancestors were spreading across the globe. If it wasn't a comet, another theory points to a radical change in solar activity. But the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis remains the most persuasive explanation so far. But here's the thing, nobody disputes that the Younger Dryas was a global catastrophe. The debate is only about what caused it and how severe it really was. And that brings us to the big question. If humans have been around for 315,000 years, why did it take so long to build anything like a civilization? We have 196,000 year-old remains from Ethiopia, and even older ones, 315,000 years from Morocco, anatomically modern humans with the same brains we have today. So if we've had the same mental hardware for 250,000 years, why did we wait until 6,000 years ago to start building cities and writing things down? Perhaps we didn't wait. Perhaps we're missing a whole chapter of our story, a lost civilization that existed long before the ones we know about. But this lost civilization wouldn't have been like ours. No cell phones, no space travel. They were different, but they had mastered navigation, astronomy, and map making. The Younger Dryas boundary layer is a black stripe in the earth, about 5 inches thick, packed with nanodiamonds, microspherules, and platinum, all signatures of a cometary impact. That layer dates to exactly 12,800 years ago, the moment when the comet storm hit, triggering wildfires that burned across continents. The mainstream archaeological response: they say these global flood myths are just exaggerated local river floods, a big deal for one village, blown out of proportion. But here is the puzzle. These myths contain precise numbers, multiples of 72, that encode an obscure astronomical phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes. To observe and record precession requires precise astronomical observations maintained over hundreds of years, something hunter-gatherers were not supposed to be capable of. This was the finding of Giorgio de Santillana, professor at MIT, in his 1960s book Hamlet's Mill, Encoded in Myths Worldwide, a forgotten science of the sky. Then there are the ancient maps, like the 1531 Orontius Phineas map, that show Antarctica as it looked during the Ice Age, before our civilization even knew it existed. Our civilization didn't discover Antarctica until 1820. And we didn't solve the longitude problem until the mid-18th century. Yet these maps show accurate relative longitudes. Archaeologists dismiss these maps as coincidence. They say mapmakers just added Antarctica to balance the world with no real knowledge. But if you look at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, 11,600 years old, you see hunter-gatherers moving 20-ton megaliths with precise astronomical alignments. This was built before agriculture, the very thing archaeologists said was necessary for such projects. It forces a complete reversal of the old model. Within 1,000 years of Göbekli Tepe's construction, agriculture appears in that region, suggesting the project itself may have driven the shift to farming. The Great Pyramid's base sides vary by only fractions of an inch, an almost impossible precision for a 6 million ton structure. Its alignment to true north is within 3 minutes of arc, just 1/20th of a degree off perfect, a feat that would challenge modern engineers. But the real mystery is the numbers. The pyramid's height multiplied by 43,200 gives the polar radius of Earth. Its perimeter multiplied by the same number gives the equatorial circumference. That number, 43,200, is no random coincidence. It's part of a sequence found in myths worldwide, all tied to the precession of the equinoxes. Precession is the slow wobble of Earth's axis, shifting the position of the stars over 26,000 years. The ancient Greeks are credited with discovering it, but the Great Pyramid suggests it was known much earlier. The pyramid sits at latitude 30 degrees north, exactly 1/3 of the way from the equator to the North Pole. Another deliberate choice, linking the monument to the Earth itself. Graham Hancock argues this knowledge didn't come from the Egyptians themselves, but was inherited from a lost civilization, one that thrived before the Younger Dryas Cataclysm. He points to the followers of Horus in Egypt and the Apkallu in Sumer, sages who advised kings, preserving ancient wisdom through the ages. These sages, he suggests, may have been part of a secret society that survived the cataclysm and guided the rebirth of civilization. The Great Pyramid itself, with its precise alignments and encoded dimensions, stands as a message in stone, a monument speaking across millennia. Hancock admits he hasn't proven a lost civilization exists, but he insists the evidence is too puzzling to ignore. If the Great Pyramid truly encodes Earth's dimensions and precession numbers, it forces a radical question. Who taught the pyramid builders? The 43,200 scale is not random. It belongs to a sequence of numbers found in ancient myths worldwide, all multiples of 72. This number 72 relates to the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that shifts the stars over 26,000 years. The Great Pyramid's alignment to true north within 3 minutes of arc is another clue. It's as if the builders knew the Earth's spin axis precisely. This precision suggests knowledge that mainstream history says didn't exist until the Greeks. It points to a forgotten source of advanced science. Hancock argues that the Great Pyramid's location at latitude 30, 1/3 of the way from the equator to the North Pole, is no accident. If the pyramid's dimensions encode Earth size, the builders must have known the planet's circumference. That knowledge was supposedly impossible 4,500 years ago. Hancock believes this knowledge was inherited from a lost civilization that existed before the Younger Dryas Cataclysm, around 20,000 years ago. But how did that knowledge survive? Hancock points to secret societies or priesthoods that preserved it across millennia, like the followers of Horus in Egypt. In summer, these sages were called the Apkallu, 7 wise beings who advised kings before and after the Great Flood. These sages, Hancock suggests, were part of a long-lived organization that preserved ancient knowledge and guided civilization's rebirth after the Cataclysm. Hancock sees the Great Pyramid as a monument that speaks across time, challenging us to figure out its message. It's an enormous question mark left by the past. If the pyramid encodes Earth's dimensions in precession, it implies the builders had a global perspective in advanced astronomy far beyond what we credit them for. But the core of Hancock's argument is that the Great Pyramid encodes the Earth's dimensions using a scale of 1 to 43,200. Take the pyramid's original height, multiply by that number, you get the polar radius of the Earth. Measure its base perimeter, multiply by the same factor, you get the equatorial circumference. Archaeologists call it a coincidence. But Hancock points out the number 43,200 is not random. It's part of a sequence found in ancient mythology worldwide, all multiples of 72. That number 72 is key to the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that shifts the stars over 26,000 years. This precession shifts the pole star and the zodiac signs over centuries. It takes about 2,160 years for the sun to move through one zodiac constellation on the spring equinox. The precession cycle is 25,920 years, which is 72 multiplied by 360. And 43,200 is exactly half of 86,400, which is the number of seconds in a day. Hancock argues this isn't accident. The pyramid's builders embedded knowledge of the Earth's dimensions in the precession cycle, knowledge supposedly undiscovered until the ancient Greeks. He believes this knowledge came from a lost civilization that survived the Younger Dryas cataclysm and passed it down through secret societies he calls the followers of Horus, or the Apkallu. These sages, he says, advised kings in ancient Egypt and Sumer, carrying forward astronomical and architectural wisdom from before the flood. He points to the sudden decline in pyramid building after the 4th dynasty. Later pyramids are crude piles of rubble inside, as if the knowledge was lost. He suggests the Great Pyramid was built as a message in stone, a monument that would speak to the future, encoded with the knowledge of a lost age. And what about what lies beneath? Hancock points to recent radar scans suggesting massive underground structures under the second pyramid at Giza, spiral stairways, chambers hundreds of feet deep. The next piece of the puzzle comes from the Amazon rainforest, where LiDAR technology has revealed thousands of geometric structures hidden beneath the canopy. These geoglyphs, precise rectangles, triangles, circles, were first spotted in the 1970s as the rainforest was cleared for farmland. Now, LiDAR surveys suggest there are thousands, along with roadways stretching over 100 kilometers. The Amazon, once thought a pristine wilderness with a few wandering hunter-gatherers, now appears to have been home to millions. They created terra preta, a man-made soil so fertile it's still used in Brazil today. Local shamans told researchers these sites were made by their ancestors, places for shamanic gatherings to contact the world beyond. All civilizations, including ours, emerged from shamanism. Shamanism uses altered states of consciousness through psychedelics, fasting, or other means to access other levels of reality. The Amazon's ayahuasca brew is a sophisticated technology for this. Ayahuasca contains DMT, which is normally destroyed by an enzyme in the gut. But the ayahuasca vine shuts that enzyme down, allowing the DMT to be absorbed orally, producing hours-long visions. Users often report a moral dimension. They're shown their own life, the pain they've caused others, from the other person's point of view. It's not a magic pill. The real work comes after, integrating the experience. Graham Hancock has taken ayahuasca around 80 times. He says it helped him come to terms with his own anger, making him gentler and softer. But it's a journey, not an overnight transformation. His own childhood was strange. Born in 1950, his father was a surgeon in India. At age 5, Graham watched dissections of hanged prisoners, presented as normal, but deeply scarring. He was sent to a brutal boarding school in northern England, beaten repeatedly by a sadistic headmaster. He never fit in, always an outsider, but he came to see that as a privilege, not a curse. He regrets not understanding his parents sooner. His mother lost 3 children before him, and his father, though eccentric, was a good man. Life is short, he says. Start what matters now. He found love later in life with Santha, his wife and partner of over 30 years. She brought together 6 children from 3 broken marriages into a loving, tight-knit family. Love, he says, is what it's all about. Graham Hancock points to a different kind of map, the Portolan charts, which he says display a shocking level of accuracy. He claims these medieval charts show coastlines with precise relative longitudes, a problem our own civilization didn't solve until the 18th century. To Hancock, this is evidence that the maps were copied from far older sources, from a time before the Ice Age ended, when sea levels were lower. The Orontes Phineas map of 1531 is a prime example. It shows Antarctica, a continent our civilization didn't officially discover until 1820. The Mapmaker's own legend says he compiled it from older sources previously hidden in darkness. a hint at lost knowledge. Mainstream archaeologists dismiss these maps as coincidences. They say mapmakers just place a southern continent for balance. But Hancock argues that the level of detail, especially the accurate longitudes, is far beyond what medieval mapmakers could have achieved on their own. He connects this to the idea that a seafaring civilization existed during the last ice age, when coastlines were different and continents were connected. He says that 27 million square kilometers of continental shelf were flooded when the ice melted, prime real estate that is now underwater. He and his wife Santha spent years scuba diving around the world, following tips from local fishermen who had seen strange structures underwater. They documented large underwater structures off places like Japan, India, and Cuba, sites that Hancock believes are remnants of a lost Ice Age civilization. He published these findings in his book Underworld, a 7-year project that he says reveals a submerged chapter of human history. Graham Hancock, now in his 70s, looks back on a life he calls a collapsed thing. Realizing how short it actually is, he says life is a beautiful, miraculous gift, and we should start living fully right now, not wait. He believes in a spiritual, non-physical side of life but rejects organized religion, preferring direct experience. He found that direct experience through ayahuasca, a powerful psychedelic brew, opened a connection to a wider realm of reality. He compares these psychedelics to a microscope, a tool that lets you see what was always there but invisible to normal perception. The host reflects on how a single inhale of DMT can transport you to a vivid, one-made 4K realm with strange beings, questioning what reality even is. Hancock agrees, saying it forces us to question the nature of reality and consciousness itself, which science still doesn't understand. He argues we should explore our own consciousness before exporting our toxicity to other planets. Hancock believes human beings have enormous potential, but we're only using a tiny fraction of it. He warns against irresponsible use of ayahuasca, saying it's an intimate experience that should be done in small groups, not large ones. He sees a hopeful role for these medicines in therapeutic breakthroughs for depression and PTSD, potentially opening the door to deeper inquiries into consciousness. The host shifts the conversation to what Hancock has learned about consciousness from ancient texts, specifically the Egyptian judgment scene. The Amazon, once thought an untouched wilderness, is now revealing vast ancient cities under the canopy. LiDAR surveys have now revealed thousands of these structures across the Amazon basin, with roadways stretching over 100 kilometers. This was no small wandering tribe. The Amazon once supported millions of people living in city-sized communities connected by straight roads. They created terra preta, a man-made super soil still used in Brazil today, managing the rainforest with extraordinary skill. A local shaman told Flint that these places were made by ancestors for shamanic gatherings, portals to contact the world beyond. All civilizations, including ours, emerged from shamanism, the use of altered states to access other levels of reality. Ayahuasca, a brew from the Amazon, contains DMT, a powerful psychedelic that shuts down the enzyme that would normally destroy it. Users report profound moral lessons, feeling the pain they caused others from the other person's perspective. Graham's own childhood in India, watching dissections at age 5. His father, a missionary surgeon, left him with a feeling of loneliness and abandonment. He never fitted in at school, was beaten by a sadistic headmaster, and felt like an outsider everywhere. But he now sees being an outsider as a privilege. It gave him the freedom to question everything, including the official story of our past. He met his wife Santha at 40, and they have been inseparable ever since. She brought 6 children from 3 broken marriages into one loving family. Hancock says the most powerful lesson from the past is that we are not separate from the universe. We are connected, and our actions have consequences that echo across time. Hancock points to the myth of a golden age, a time before the Cataclysm when humans lived in harmony. He says that memory is not just a story, it's a warning. He warns that our civilization ticks all the mythological boxes for the next lost civilization. We have nuclear weapons, a fractured psyche, and leaders who lack wisdom. Hancock says the ancient myths all share a theme. We brought the cataclysm upon ourselves. Our arrogance, our noise, our irreverence angered the gods or nature itself. He argues that we must move past nationalism, past tribalism, and recognize our shared humanity. That is the only way to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. Hancock believes psychedelics like ayahuasca can help us see beyond our narrow reality. He says they offer a direct experience of the interconnectedness of all things. He says we have enormous potential as a species, but we are using only a fraction of it. We need to wake up, grow up, and take responsibility for our future. Hancock reflects on his own mortality, facing open heart surgery. He says life is a miracle and we should not waste it. We must live fully and with purpose. He says the most important thing we can do is to think for ourselves, to question everything, and to not blindly trust authority, whether it's science, media, or government. Hancock ends with a call for independent inquiry. He says the past is not a closed book, it's an open question, and we all have the right to ask. He says that love is what it's all about. The love of family, of partner, of community. That is the thread that connects us across all of human history. And so, as the sun sets on this conversation, we are left with a question. What will we do with the time we have? Will we wake up, or will we become the next lost civilization? Graham Hancock, nearing the end of his life, feels blessed to have traveled the world and had adventures with his wife Santha, who he calls a brilliant photographer and partner. He reflects that meeting Santha saved his life. Without her loving steering hand, he believes he would have made nothing of his life, and that love is what it's all about. He feels hurt by accusations of racism, which he finds unforgivable, especially given his multi-ethnic family. But overall, he says he is blessed and lucky. He urges independent inquiry, thinking for ourselves and questioning everything, not just the past, but all accepted truths, including science. He worries humanity is poised on the edge of an abyss, with technology outgrowing our mentality, and that we may bring about our own cataclysm unless we wake up. On his last day, what he will care about most is the love of his family and the feeling that he did his best to carry out the task that fell upon him to ask questions and challenge the story of the past.